My North Star has always been a fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love, meaningful work, and enough wealth to not have to worry about it. If I know that's my North Star, A, B, and Z, as Sean Puri always says, which is where I am now, where I want to be in the very next step.
You were working with Hormozis over at acquisition.com, and you've taken a break from that to go write the secondary book.
Volume negates luck. Not enough people are willing to delay their dopamine. The one idea I wish I talked a little bit more about in the book was you cannot fail if the goal is experience.
Welcome to another episode of Founders Growth. My name is John Hill, aka Small Mountain. I'm the founder of Adapted Growth, and today on the show we have Jay Yang. Jay is the author of You Can Just Do Things, and has ran an agency. He's also worked for acquisition.com and has recently wrapped that up so that way he can put full-time focus on his secondary book. And I'm excited to talk about that book as much as he'll share with us. But the first book, You Can Just Do Things, has got a bunch of very cool stuff for anybody who's walking a founder path, an entrepreneurial path. And Jay, can you talk a little bit about the book and maybe some of the stuff that you've gotten from people who've read it and used those ideas?
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to chat.
Absolutely.
You Can Just Do Things. I wrote the book because honestly, I couldn't not write it. It was the thing that was so top of mind for me. So I started the initial first drafts when I was a freshman in college. And at the time, I remember sitting down and having dinner with a bunch of my friends, and they were all computer science majors. And they were telling me like how many companies they had applied to for internships. And one of my friends applied to over 1,000 companies. He like mass sent these applications.
Mm-hmm.
And my mind was blown by how you could do so much volume and get no results at all. And so I was like, well, there's got to be a better way. And actually, I know a better way, because I had been cold emailing founders in high school and successfully landing internships and getting opportunities. And so I was like, well, I think more people should know about this idea of what I like to call the permissionless approach. And so You Can Just Do Things is this idea of doing the work up front, of not waiting for permission. And so rather than sending 1,000 applications to all these companies, it's picking a few companies, doing your research, doing your homework on what problems they have, and then solving them before you're asked to solve them. And so far, that's worked out pretty well in my career. And so I wanted to help other people learn about that as well.
So, okay, there's a lot in this idea, right? Because, a lot of people talk about that it's hard to find good help these days, especially with like hiring situations being the way that they are and everything. For your own path, was this something you had to find for yourself? Was it something that just kind of came naturally to you and you were able to put it into play? How did you get onto this path of realizing that it was different than how most people approached their work, their growth, their development?
Yeah, I'll kind of take you back to the beginning. Back in COVID, I was playing video games in my room for like 5 hours every single day.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, man, I should probably do something better with my life. I probably should be more productive. And so I Googled how to make money online. And one of the first things was to start a YouTube channel. And so I started a YouTube channel where I'd promote underground artist songs, help them get exposure on their music. I posted a song every single day for the summer during COVID.
Mhm.
And the channel didn't really go where I wanted to go, but it taught me the power of online content, of being able to make things and put it out into the world and have people see it. And then I started a bunch of other different projects. I like to call it my portfolio of failures. I started an Instagram theme page. I started a newsletter. I tried another motivational YouTube channel. I even tried a clothing brand, and none of them really worked out. And so I was like, I'm working really hard, but I'm not getting what I want. And so obviously I don't know how to work. And so I said, well, what would increase the likelihood that I get what I want? And so that's where I came up with the idea of, well, if I work with my favorite company, chances are I'll probably learn something about running a company. And so that when I do start my own company, I'll have learned the lessons and the failures and the mistakes so that I avoid some of those with my own. And so that's kind of kicked off the whole start of my journey cold emailing different founders. And so the first founder I cold emailed was Tyler Denk, the CEO of Beehive, newsletter platform.
Mhm.
And I said, hey, Tyler, like I'd love to work with you. Here are 3 things that I think I can help with. And so I listed out 3 project ideas. Pick one, like I'll work for free. I'll like put me in the corner, put me in a box. I don't care. I just want to work with you guys. And luckily he liked one of the ideas. And so that was the first cold email that I sent. The second one was after Beehive.
Okay.
So I entered at Beehive, went back to high school, was playing basketball. And then I was like, well, I've learned a lot about marketing for a tech startup, but I'd like to learn more about how to market for personal brands and for founders. And so I saw that Noah Kagan, who's the founder of AppSumo,
Mhm.
was looking for someone to help grow his newsletter because he was publishing a book. And so I dropped everything and I spent the next 50 hours putting together a pitch deck. It was 19 slides deconstructing his entire social media and email funnel. Here's what you're doing. Here's what you could be doing better. Here's what someone else is doing. Here's what I'd do if I'd work with you. It was 19 slides. And then at the end, I attached 9 pieces of social media content ready to be published. And so I said, test it out, try it. If you like it, let's work together. If not, no harm, no foul.
Mhm.
And luckily he liked it. And so that kicked off our journey together.
And the gap between the first attempt, right, and working with the team at Beehive, to working with Noah and his team and working with him on the book, it sounds like this idea got way more fleshed out for you, right? I mean, because like showing up with like a massive deck and social media stuff and having the confidence to be like, hey, here's everything you're not doing, here's everything I would be doing for you. Did that all come from like the time at Beehive, or were you thinking about it differently and so you were taking a different approach?
I think it was two things. The first one was, yeah, at Beehive, I learned that the power of just over delivering and uh, far exceeding anyone's expectations.
Mm,
Um, I think the second one was honestly just me getting older and more experience and realizing that a cold email with 3 ideas is cool, but if you could show instead of tell, it's far more powerful. And so rather than saying, hey, no, here's 3 things I can do for you, it was like, here's a bunch of things I can do for you, detailed how I do it step by step.
mhm.
And here's 9 things you can try right now.
Interesting. When you think about the difference, right, between like tech and SaaS versus, the personal brand of the founder and everything, I'm curious what sticks out to you as like the biggest difference between trying to grow one versus the other?
I would say something that I learned from Noah is what he calls the name test. And so, specifically for personal brand content, whenever we're putting out social media content, we want to write one of zero content, right? Content that no one else can put out. And so, if you were to cover your name and your profile picture, would people be able to tell that it was your content? And so, when I was working with Noah, a lot of the content that we put out was like, hey, I was employee number 30 at Facebook, and then I got fired. Here are 10
Mhm.
of the lessons I learned, working directly with Mark Zuckerberg. You can
Yeah.
cover his name, you can cover his profile picture, but no one else can say that and no one else can share those lessons. And so I
Hmm.
think a lot of times, especially with AI nowadays, I think it makes a lot of sense to lean into those stories, those lessons that only you can say and only you can tell. And so that's where the idea of like do cool shit in the world and then talk about it
Yeah.
really comes about.
Interesting. I like that. Yeah, the 0 of 1, right? And I mean, I met Noah a couple of times. We've done some charity bike rides, and I've been reading his content for years. He's one of the first people I ever kind of studied in this space and everything. And he does have a flavor, if you will, right? Like you can kind of tell when it's Noah. Um, that's fascinating. Jumping ahead a little bit, right? A
Yes.
lot of people come and they talk to me, and they have the same question of like, okay, John, like, how did you know that you could do this? Right. And it's weird because like I don't think of myself as a super confident person, right? I've just been kind of like figuring it out, improving as I go and stuff like this. But one of the things we talk about, especially on the show, is like the first sell is that you have to sell yourself, right? On the idea that like you can go do this thing, right? As opposed to waiting around for the perfect idea or the perfect, situation or for permission from any kind of outside source. I'm curious, once you make that decision though, where does the permissionless approach benefit founders and entrepreneurs the most after they've kind of decided to take that first step of action themselves?
I think the way I'd approach it is this line that I tell people is, which is empathy is the greatest skill you can have as an entrepreneur, marketer, and just human being in general.
Hmm.
Like the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, hey, what would make it easy for them to say yes? What would decrease the friction for them to agree or hire you or work with you or be a customer?
Hmm.
And I think that is such a powerful question, whether you're trying to land a role with your favorite entrepreneur or market your product. It's putting yourself in their shoes. And so once you give yourself the permission of, all right, I can just do things. I think the second question is, okay, well, why should anyone care? And so that's where the idea of like, how could this be an absolute no-brainer for the other person? And I think answering that question is the root to a lot of the solutions.
Interesting. Okay. We talked a little bit before we're turning on the recording, right? That you were running an agency team for a while, right? What'd you learn about being in the founder seat for yourself?
Oh, a whole bunch of things. It was one of the it was definitely a messy process and something that I stumbled into and stumbled through. I think the biggest lesson I learned was that what's obvious to me is sometimes amazing to others and not obvious to them. And so, for example, some of the things that came more natural to me, which is writing for others or having conversations with founders, wasn't as easy for some of the people I was working with. And so,
Hmm.
thinking through, okay, how can I articulate or teach or uh, systemize the things that are in my head and share it with others so that they can duplicate it and replicate it for themselves. And so that's when I learned a lot about, well, what is an SOP? Like,
Oh yeah.
how do you structure it? Do you need a Loom video attached to it? What happens if they watch it once and can't do it, or they don't watch it, or they don't refer back to it? How do you reinforce them to go back and watch it? And, how do you reinforce the behaviors you want to be seen and not reinforce the behaviors you don't want to have happen? And so it was a crash course in human psychology and in leadership.
Interesting. What do you think, if you, well, okay, so I have a question about this, right? So I know we're working with the Hormozis over at acquisition.com, and you've taken a break from that to go write the secondary book. Do you see yourself kind of going back into that kind of founder path again, or do you think that you'll continue to try to, work with people that you're excited to work with, but not really kind of like launching something else bigger?
I don't have an answer for that. I would say my
That's
North
fair.
Star has always been a fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love, meaningful work, and enough wealth not have to worry about it. And so
Wow.
if I know that's my North Star, I think it makes sense to know A, B, and Z, as Sean Puri always says, which is where I am now, where I want to be in the very next step. And so the next step for me is this second book that I'm working on. But for the rest of the letters in the alphabet, I'm not sure yet, but only time will tell.
I think it's a very cool thing to be able to kind of hold space for like whatever comes, right? Like I think it's very easy to get kind of too dogmatic with our own visions and goals and kind of put ourselves under, I call it negative goal weight, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's rare to kind of just, especially, being a little younger, of like being able to be like, hey, I'm just on a path and whatever happens, happens, but I don't need it to go in a very specific way, right? It just keeps us very open. Um, Talking about writing, I would like to dive into this a little bit, because I'm working on my second book as well, and I decided to make it way harder for myself because I just like doing these things. Has it has it been harder for you with the second book than it was for the first one?
Yes and no. I think in one sense it's easier because I know what the process of writing a book is like now. I
Mm-hmm.
think one of my biggest goals with the first book was to get it out into the world, messy, imperfectly, but so that I could prove to myself I actually know how to write and publish a book. And
Yeah.
so uh, it's given me a lot of confidence for the second book. I would say no, because at the same time now my standards have raised.
Mm.
With this book, the goal isn't to just get it out. The goal is to write an incredible book and market it at the highest level.
Hmm.
Now that I've worked with several of different entrepreneurs and authors who have launched their books, um, and so yeah, it's both.
Yeah, I feel that, right? It's like this kind of like false sense of security because it's like I know these steps, but it doesn't necessarily make them easier in the day-to-day action of this thing, right? And do you talk about the book you're writing now, or do you keep it all under wraps until like you get closer to it and you're ready to release it? I don't want to kind of pry you open
For
if you're not ready
now,
to talk
I
about
don't
it.
talk about it a ton,
Okay.
just because I found that when I talk about the book, I tend to feel proud of like the idea instead of the work, and so
Yeah.
uh, trying
Uh,
to stay heads down and lock in.
I appreciate that, right? I'm trying to do the same thing, right? Because like it's helpful for me to talk about it, but there is a stance to where like I'm just talking about it so much. It's like I'm trying to like validate the hypothesis, validate the idea, and like to me, I got to be careful with that, right? Because I want to write the things that I'm excited to write about. Now, it's got to be within a lane of relevance, obviously, right? But I'm also trying to make sure that it stays kind of more or less clean to my original intention. So when you're writing for yourself versus writing for someone else, I'm curious, like, is that, do you, well, first of all, it's very hard to write for other people just in general, right?
Mhm.
And it sounds like because your experience, right, or maybe you have some talent around this idea, do you have anything that makes it easier for you to write in the voice of someone else?
I think that the only thing that I could point back to is just a curiosity. I think one of the things that I've been intentional about is not writing for people that I don't admire. Because
Oh,
when you write for someone else, you are thinking like them. And when you are thinking their thoughts, you end up kind of adopting similar thought patterns and making similar decisions.
mhm.
And so I've made it a point of like, I will only write for people that are one, ahead of me, and two, living the life that, I aspire to live. And three, are clear thinkers that I admire. And so like, I would never write for someone that, even if it's a ton of money, but if I don't admire them as a person and as a thinker, then I don't want to think your thoughts. And so I tend not to want to write for them.
I love that, man. Like, I think that's a unique perspective. Like, we've done some content for some other people and stuff like this, and I uh I've never really been in that spot to where like I kind of had to make a judgment call around it, right? But I think I would err on the side of that. Like, I don't think I could write in this voice, right? Even if I wanted to, kind of thing. Is it easier for you to write for other people than it is for yourself, or do you find about the same amount of effort?
I would, yeah, I guess a lot of my answers would be yes and no. I would say on one hand, writing for others is easier because I have less judgment, like less internal
Oh,
judgment.
yeah,
I would say harder just because obviously it's both an art and a science, and so it's not just what I want to say, but it's what they would say and how they would say it, and putting myself in their shoes, and then putting myself in their audience's shoes, and then going back and forth. So there's a lot of mental chess being played writing for others that uh, isn't necessarily as so writing for myself.
interesting. When you're writing for yourself, do you have any tips or tricks about beating back that internal judgment, that internal critic?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is always let's just get it out first, and you can't optimize what isn't there. And so I just try and write terrible first draft, get it out on the page,
Hmm.
and then from there we can start to be nitpicky. But I think the real problem occurs when you have both the writer and the editor thinking at the same time. And so I
Oh,
try and turn off my editor brain and just get stuff out.
yeah. I'm very lucky in the fact that I don't have to do my own editing, right? And until I realized how much that was like hamstringing me, like I get to work with my wife and she's my editor, and obviously there's a lot of trust there and she knows my stuff, but like just being able to divorce myself from that idea. Because like I would be like, "Oh, I don't want to write anything bad." Well, that in itself is judgment, right? As opposed to just
Mhm.
like turning on the faucet and letting it like, come out of you and everything. Um, I would love to kind of zoom in a little bit, right? Like, do you have any, what does your writing process look like? Do you have like a daily word count, or are you going for a certain number at time? Like, how do you hold yourself accountable to this thing and make sure that you're staying on the path and so that way it gets done?
Yeah. Right now, I am deep in writing the first draft of the book. And
Okay.
so I have a Google spreadsheet with one column that has the date, and another column just has a checkbox. I don't necessarily have a word count. I think like I write until I don't feel as inspired, and then I, you know, put the pen down per se and start again tomorrow. But
Hmm.
my goal is to not break the chain of writing. And so one of my earlier mistakes writing the second book was believing that I needed at least 2 hours of focused, like deep work time to write the book. And what
Yeah.
I started to do is miss days. 'Cause I was doing other stuff. And so uh, I've since realized and come to the reminder that anything above zero compounds. And so even if it's just 15 minutes of thinking about it or 15 minutes of just writing words in a journal, like anything above zero makes progress. And so I've since lowered the bar to increase the consistency, and it's been helpful.
Man, I love that, right? I think everybody, like for me, I always have a daily word count, like at a minimum 1,500 words, right? And that's the thing that really helps me be consistent. But ultimately, it's about, being consistent in the action, right? Because if you take too big of a gap away, you lose the momentum, that critic comes back, the fear comes back. And this is the same whether it's writing or whether it's doing like outbound, right? And sending cold emails and trying to set appointments and everything. You take big long breaks and you're not consistent about it, that like it's like starting over, as opposed to, I talk a lot about chopping wood and carrying water. If you just do a little bit of
Mm.
it every day, you will get there, but like it's so easy to procrastinate. And, if you go looking through your email, you're going to find something else to do other than the things you probably should be doing. Um, so with the stepping away from acquisition and working on the book full time, how else do you fill your day, right? Because you sound like someone who's very driven and probably has multiple projects happening at any one time and everything. How much of your day is spent on the book versus like other endeavors? And I'm curious how much like space you hold just for like silence and solitude and thinking and stuff like that, and if that's important to your process.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time since leaving acquisition thinking about what my ideal day looks like. Because I think like a good life is just the collective sum of many good days in a row. And so to me, it's like, how can I design the perfect day and then live that day as many days in a row as possible? And so for me, it's a good day when I get to wake up and work on my book and then have a very slow morning, eat breakfast, do whatever, chill, um, do some social media work, eat lunch with friends, go to the gym, read a book or have some meetings, and then enjoy the evening with family. And so if I can live that day as many days in a row as possible, it might sound boring to others, but to me that sounds pretty fulfilling.
It's I mean, I think one of the reasons that I like doing the show is that I like showing everybody how wide this path can be, right? Because, like there's all these influencers and the lifestyle bros and all of that other stuff, and people start thinking like, well, okay, I, but there's not anything wrong with just like having the life that you want and walking your own path and calling your own shots. Like, I'm not a lifestyle guy. I'm a homebody introvert guy who just likes reading and gaming and working on hard things, right? But all this work that I do allows me to go do that, right? And it's not for anybody else. When I started out, I was kind of doing the thing of like, okay, like if I do these things, I'll then get to go do all the cool stuff that all the other like entrepreneurs get to do. And like van life was something that I thought that I would be like really like interested in. And now I'm like,
Hmm.
I like my stuff. I like my space. I don't like, and no, like no knock against anybody who does that path, right? It's just, I've got a kid in high school. And so, stability is important for her. And I like having my stuff and my space and everything else. So like, this is, probably boring for most other people, but it's the best lane for me. And that's really cool, and just doing it for yourself as opposed to maybe status or maybe for like to look cool in your networking or other things like that is a thing that I see a lot of people get tripped up on. Just do it for yourself. Um, when you moved from working with Noah over to working with the Hormozis and acquisition.com, like I know Noah a little bit. I don't know the Hormozis at all. Was it different, right? Because like based upon the content I see, right, they're very driven people. I know Noah, he's a very driven person and everything. Was it more or less kind of the same environment? Did you have any culture shock, any big changes or difference in working?
I think the biggest difference, honestly, was that working with Alex and Layla was in person here in Vegas at the headquarters.
Oh
So
wow.
when I was working with Noah, I was still in high school, so it was all remote.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest difference is like now I'm in an office and I'm at a headquarters and I'm seeing people shaking hands like it's a in person thing. And so I think that was the biggest change for me is like uh, oh, you have the rest of your body. It's not just the upper body on a Zoom screen. Like, oh, hello. And so that was
Yeah.
probably the biggest change.
So, okay, I would love to dive into that a little bit more, right? Because, like, I know a lot of people are staunchly against on-site work, right? I think when you're, more experienced and you know what's helpful for you, you can make a more reasoned decision. Do you think that being on site has benefits that maybe some people that are just like solely focused on remote only are going to miss out on?
Yeah, I saw that thing on Twitter. There's a bunch of people talking about how it was the question, would you rather make like 150K but work in person or make 100K but work remotely? And a bunch of people were picking the remote thing, which no judgment at all.
Mhm.
But I think early on in your career, it makes sense to try and get somewhere in person because the amount of context and little things that you pick up, whether it's like eating lunch or getting a coffee or just the office banter, a
Yeah,
lot of the things that you can't get working remotely. And I think for anyone early in their career, it makes sense to find the best people you know and get as close to them as possible, physically, digitally, whatever. Because I think you subconsciously pick up the standards that they have. And so, now that I've left acquisition, anything that I work on next, like I have such high standards for myself. Like I won't accept anything other than the very best because working with them, I learned a lot of the standards that they had. And so, uh, yeah, I think it makes sense to try and find what great looks like for you and get as close to them as possible.
I love that. In sales, since it used to be you could just bring people together and put them in a boiler room, right? And have them all call and dial and you would kind of learn by osmosis, right? And now with so many remote teams, and especially like younger professionals who were during, like hitting the scene during COVID and like immediately after COVID and everything, there's a developmental gap, right? Especially sales side of being able to be practiced and kind of know what to say and know how to respond and stuff like that. But I love the idea of being very focused on like finding like the right people to go that deep with, right? Because super easy to get focused on, well, I just need a job, right? But if you're in that mode, oh man, like there's never going to be good work, right? It's just going to be a slog and you're going to hate it and you're not going to be bought in and invested. So, um, yeah, but if you find the right tribe, right, the right culture, the right group of people, like it should unlock you a little bit, right? Like my first 10 years of being in sales, I was not bought in. Like it was a thing that I did to to pay for poker and to pay for martial arts training. It wasn't a job that I ever wanted to do. And because of that, I didn't really I was an okay performer, but I wasn't like a top tier performer or anything and had to kind of relearn how to work right outside of that mode, so you can get very stuck with some of these things. Um, I'm curious, right? Because I was looking through some of the reviews on your book before the call earlier today. Has anyone taken the idea too far? Has anyone been like, whoa, right? And they come back and they talk to you about it and you're like, whoa, you kind of like way overshot the mark on the actual core idea. Has it bitten anybody from taking it too wild?
Surprisingly, no, I haven't found anyone who've taken it too far. All the emails that I get, all the messages have been overwhelmingly positive. Like this inspired me to quit my job. This inspired me to cold email the author that I love. This
That's
inspired me
awesome.
to to do the work up front for this professor that I want to work with, and he said yes. And I've been just blown away by the responses, to be honest.
When you right, because one of the things that I talk about all the time as a salesperson, right, is like don't just send a proposal. Like make sure the proposal makes sense. Make sure that there's a need and stuff like this,
Yeah.
And so when I first heard about your book and the permissionless approach, I was kind of like, huh, right. I was kind of looking at it a little crossways and everything because I was like, I like the idea of not waiting for permission, but there's also, especially sales side, like it becomes super easy to like sell ourselves on the idea that it's a real opportunity, but it's not one and stuff like that. Are there any are there any bookends to this idea, right? Because you talked about, 50 hours of like working on a slide deck and putting the idea together. Do you give any advice on like, if it's like not overdoing it, like when to call it over, when to go find something else to do?
Yeah, I think there's obviously that healthy dose of common sense that needs to come into play. The one idea I wish I talked a little bit more about in the book was the idea that you cannot fail if the goal is experience. And so like in the process of creating these pitch decks, say the person says no.
Hmm.
That's okay because you are building yourself, like you are the product. And so going through the process of putting these pitch decks together, of doing your homework, of doing your research, of practicing empathy, like now you have the architecture to then replicate this for the next person, and it becomes easier and faster. And you begin to think in these ways. You start to ask yourself these mental questions of what would it take for it to be a yes? What would decrease the friction? How do you make it a no-brainer for the other person? Like having these mental models in your brain automatically will serve you for the rest of your life. And so I view it as like, even if they say no, like how do you win even if you lose? And I
Hmm,
think the pitch deck strategy is one of the best ways to practice that.
interesting. So you've said this thing twice, and I would love to learn a little bit more about this, right? The concept of empathy, right? And I think it's super important because if we want to actually have connection with other people, what happens if you try to do the permissionless approach, but you're not leaning into empathy?
If you try and do the permissionless approach and you don't lean into empathy, it is very easy for the other person to say no. And for example, I had someone redesign my banner image on LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
he did all the work. He sent over the banner image, and then he said, "Jay, that'll be $200." And it was very easy for me to say, "No, thanks. I like my current banner. Like, I'm not going to pay you $200 for this."
Hmm.
And so I think it's just honestly like, what response do you think that they will give to this, and is that the response that you want? I think like going through these mental questions will increase the likelihood that they give you the response that you want.
Interesting. Um, how do how can people like work on improving their skills at empathy? How have you gotten better at that yourself?
Yeah, not to go back in this loop, but asking those same questions. What is the outcome that I want? What would increase the likelihood that I get the outcome that I want? What would decrease the friction for them to say yes? What would make it a no-brainer? Like if you genuinely ask yourself that question, like and sit with that question, and then take action on that question, uh, I found that to be the best way to practice empathy.
Awesome. Okay. Do you okay, I'm curious because we've talked about the ones you've won on, right? You know, the Beehive and the Noah Kagan and the Hormozy. Have you done one of these pitches and it's not gone your way?
The boring answer is no, I have not. I have for every pitch that I've done, I've gotten the outcome that was favorable.
Interesting. One of the things that I think about, I used to be a poker player and you can't win all the time, right? And so like do you feel that's kind of heightening your own standards, heightening your own expectations? Like does it make you at all kind of gun shy when you're thinking about like opportunities you might go after in the future? Because like it might be important to kind of keep that win rate versus really kind of like flexing and pushing yourself as the product. Does that show up for you at all?
I would say no. I think the reason I have been more strategic on the things that I'm working on now is because I think the higher you go, the more like the more things you can do. And
Uh-huh.
so that makes it even more important to think about what actually like do you want to do. And I think one of my favorite lines is from Charlie Munger. He says, "I'm here to cross the swamp, not to fight all the alligators." And so I think now, especially in this phase of my life, I got a ton of opportunities since leaving acquisition. It's like, does that align with my North Star? Is that where I want to go?
Mhm.
And so that's the frame I've been thinking.
Interesting. I've never heard that line before, actually. I like that line, right? I'm not here to fight all the alligators. Switching gears a little bit, because we were talking, I mean, obviously as a writer, you write, you've written for other people, you've written for yourself and everything. When people are talking about content, right? And everyone's talking about content. And obviously, you know, if you look at guys like Hormozy and Kagan and these people, like they're putting out mountains of content. Where have you shifted your thinking, your perceptions about, you know, specifically organic content? Like, have you changed your mind on anything in that space?
I think the biggest lesson that I learned from Noah Kagan was quantitative marketing. Before working with him, I was what I like to call a qualitative marketer, which basically just means I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so I'd throw shit at the wall and kind of just hope it sticks.
Mhm.
Um, but working with Noah, he pushed me to be like, all right, Jay, why are we putting content out on all of these channels? Like, what's actually driving the growth for the book? Like, what's actually getting book sales? And what's actually getting us the results that we want? And so, oh, you know what? Actually, Instagram's not doing it. Let's stop. Let's cut Instagram for now, and let's double down on Twitter or X,
Mhm.
which was our top platform at the time. And so uh, I think that approach of like, well, what are we actually trying to optimize for, and is that getting us the result that we want? And then holding yourself accountable to that. And so I would write a weekly report to Noah of like, all right, here's the content we put out. Here are the results that content got. And here's what we're going to try next week based on this past week. And so constantly iterating. And I think for a lot of founders and a lot of entrepreneurs that are starting their journey with content, uh, they can be consistent for the sake of consistency. But if you do not iterate, then your students putting out not so great content. And so I think the key part that a lot of people are missing is that iteration aspect.
I love this, right? And if you're like Noah, right? You've been in the space for a while, you have a list and everything else like this, right? It becomes super easy to use data. Like, okay, this email didn't do well, this post didn't do well, these posts are doing well, and finding some trends and patterns, right? If someone is new to trying to develop their brand or to create content and stuff like this, how should they be thinking about their iteration? Like, how should they be is it like, just not focusing on vanity metrics, focusing on your own metrics? Is it not benchmarking yourself against other people? How can people who are starting off on this path do a better job of setting themselves up for success when it comes to content?
It's two things, I would say. It's number one of my favorite lines from Caleb Ralston, who used to lead content at acquisition.com and is an absolute savage at content and brand. He says, you cannot know what quality is until you do quantity. And
Mm,
so it's almost this spray and pray method of machine gunning out a bunch of different content, things that maybe you don't think will work, but how do you know until the market sees it? And so putting out a vast buffet of content to see what sticks, and then from there figuring out what works. How can we double down on the top 10%, cut the bottom 10%? And I think the second method is who are the other people in your niche that are putting out content and what's working for them. And so it's kind of like the inside and outside perspective, like what's working for us and what's working for them,
hmm,
and kind of toggling back and forth.
interesting. Um, what are your thoughts on like chasing or not chasing, chasing is probably a bad label, but over focusing on signals and patterns of other people doing versus like making the content that you want to make? How do you find a balance with that? How do you talk about that balance for other people?
I think it goes back to what are we optimizing for? And so I always think of it as when you do things for the sake of like when you do things for yourself, it's a hobby. When you do things for others, it's a business. And so if you are creating content to grow your business, then you cannot just think about what you want. You have to think about what your customers want and what your clients want. If you are just putting out content because you love making content, you love making videos, you love writing, that's a different story. So I think it goes back to what are we optimizing for?
Yeah, okay. I like that. Um, we were talking, and you said this line, right? And I'm going to read this off of the screen here because I just really like this. It says, most founders should be optimizing for what their business can do for their life, not what their life can do for their business. Where does that come from? Like, and how do people misapply that thinking, right? Because it's one of those lines that I think, oh, yeah, that sounds good. But I think a lot of people would probably miss on like how to apply that and be consistent with the idea.
Yeah, it's an idea I've been reflecting a lot recently. I believe it is a fallacy to believe that you should sacrifice the journey in the pursuit of the reward. You should sacrifice the enjoyment of the climb in the pursuit of the view at the top of the mountain.
Mhm.
And I think so many people will do things that make them miserable for 99% of the journey in hopes that when they get to that 1%, the end of the journey, that they'll feel happy and they'll feel satisfied and that it'll be worth it. But I
Mhm.
think life is simply time and what we make of it. And so if you are sacrificing the 99%, like that is your life. And so I've been obsessed with this concept of daily wealth, which I know we touched upon a little bit before of like, what is your ideal day and how can you design your ideal day and live that day as many days in a row as possible. And so for me, it's like, all right, if I know what a good day looks like, then within those confines, how can I make the most money living that ideal day? Instead of saying, how can I make the most money possible? It's what day do I want to live and how do I make as much money within that confines?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, awesome, man. I'm curious, you worked with some very cool names, right? If we just quickly kind of talk about your time at Beehive, your time with Noah, and your time at acquisition.com, like what is the biggest tip or leg up or perception shift that you got from each one of those opportunities?
Hmm. That is a fun question. I like that question. From Beehive, I think the biggest thing I learned was Parkinson's law, which is that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. And so I observed that when we were launching features and products, we operated in 2-week sprints, not month-long sprints. And so just simply having a shorter deadline, as simple and as trite as that sounds, will vastly improve the quality, output, and productivity of you or your company. And so uh, the question I always ask myself now is, how can I do this faster? Like, why
Interesting.
is the default pace, why does the standard pace have to be my pace? And so, uh, yeah, that's a question I often return to.
I love that.
From Noah, I learned so much from Noah. It was awesome. I would say I'll just rattle off a bunch of sayings that are just live in my head rent free. I
Sure,
think
please. Yeah.
first one is now, not how. And so a lot of people get caught up on how they're going to start the business or how they're going to set up their LLC, but like, what can you do right now to take action and really test your goals? And so one of the things that he talks about in his book $1 Million Weekend is validating your idea. And so, can you get 3 customers for your idea before you start the LLC, before you even have a product? Can you just ask 3 people, call them, text them, say, "Hey, I have this idea. Will you give me a payment up front to like secure your product?" And
Hmm.
that is one of the best ways I've found, because I think 99% of people never actually start their business, and so that
Oh yeah.
is one of the biggest things that people struggle with. I would say the second one is test and invest, and so this applies to both strategy, like what initiatives do we want to run, and then also like hiring. So, you know, when I'm bringing on different people to my team, it's like, how can we give them a paid trial before we hire them? How can we give them a test project to see how they work? Because
Hmm.
some people may be great at interviewing and, great at speaking, but not great at actually doing and executing. And so,
Yep.
test and invest.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I learned a ton from Noah. I have a blog post that I wrote in my newsletter about 10 of the things I learned from Noah. It was, uh,
Cool. Yeah, we'll get a link to that and put it in the notes. And what about it at acquisition with the Hormozis?
I would say volume negates luck. I think working at acquisition, seeing how much work, preparation, and just time spent on things that we're going to launch. So, for example, when we were launching $100 million money models, Alex spent 3 years, I believe, on the book. And I think like not enough people are willing to delay their like dopamine. And I think like if you spent a disproportionate amount of your time upfront on the product, the results will be, how do I rephrase this? People vastly underestimate how much the initial work up front matters. And so if you were to spend 100 hours on a product, you may get 2 to 3x the returns. But if you spent 1,000, 10,000 hours on a product, like the result isn't 4x or 5x, it's 10x, it's 100x. And so it makes a lot of sense to spend a disproportionate amount of your time on the upfront work before you launch. And so that's what I've kind of internalized from my book. The second book is, it makes a lot of sense to spend more of my time making sure this is the absolute best book that I can put out, more so than trying to spend all my time chasing it with marketing on the back end.
Yeah, man. I think it was 3 or 4 months after I put up my book, and then someone was like, "Okay, when's the next one come out?" And I was like, "Good Lord, we just got this one out, right?" And like this idea that I was going to become this person who has a book out like every year, I'm like, I applaud people that are able to keep up with that pace, right? But like I have a business to run and a family to spend time with and everything else, so I I I start to beat myself up a little bit because, the window has been bigger than I would like it to be, but I'm also trying to write it as a narrative, which just fundamentally makes it so much harder than just like
Mm.
writing like the business reference book and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's the thing that I think will help more people, right? So it kind of feels, it wasn't just like, I want to see if I can do this. I did kind of place a bet around the idea that, because my favorite business books are all narratives, right? So if I put these ideas into a narrative, it'll reach more people than just like a dry business book, because it can be dry sometimes. So, but that, we're multiple years into writing this thing at this stage now, because, I'm trying to like make sure that it's good enough that I'm excited to go out and push it, because, that's the thing that people
Hmm.
don't talk about, right? Like you're going to have to go put some weight behind it. And if you're not proud of it, like I think that that becomes fundamentally so much harder to go want to stand in those streams and like take the pushback and stuff like that. Changing gears, Jay, because I appreciate your time and I want to make the most of it. I'm going to hop into some of the questions that I ask everybody. First one is, when you think about the permissionless approach, right? And let's put this specifically around content, because we talked a little bit about content. What does someone who's starting out today, who wants to start making content because they want to build a brand, they want to build something, what should they be taking from the permissionless approach and trying to do in the early days?
The permissionless approach to me is how do you work with the people you admire? So if it was taken through the lens of content,
Hmm.
one of my favorite things to do, and this may not be a scalable thing, is what I like to call the public DM. And so a lot of people try and cold email or cold DM the people they admire,
Hmm.
but chances are you don't get a response. And it's very easy for the receiver to be like, I saw it, but I'm not going to respond.
Yeah.
But if you take the public DM method and you write your message, but you post it on social media, you post it as a piece of content, and then you tag the person that you want to reach out to, then
Hmm.
you have all your friends vouch for you and tag that person as well. It makes it a lot harder for that person to ignore that message, because one, chances are they see it because so many people are tagging them. But two, now that you have a ton of social proof, a social like weight behind your post, they feel a little bit more obligation to at least give a response. And so uh, it's not a very talked about method, but I think if you are trying to grow your business at the very start with content, that is an underrated approach to get some of those whales.
I love that idea, right? Like I'll see salespeople sometimes do it, right? Because that's the lane that I hang out in the most, and so I'll see like, hey, anybody know this person? I can't seem to get a meeting with them, and stuff like that. I've never really thought about it in this other lane about like trying to find like people to work with or maybe make content with and to start. What is a piece of a business advice that you see now that you can really appreciate, but you had to kind of learn your lesson the hard way, like run into the wall or, fall into the trap before you can appreciate it now?
The biggest mistake I made running my agency was believing that the reason I plateaued or got stuck at a bottleneck was because I wasn't good enough at the skill that I was delivering. And so I ran a ghostwriting marketing agency. And so I believed to scale the agency, I just needed to get better at marketing. I needed to get better at ghostwriting. When in fact, the thing that was limiting my business was my inability to find, hire, train, and retain talent, because
Mm.
the business was constrained by the people and processes that I had in the business. And so I kept pushing harder on, I'm going to read another marketing book. I'm going to take another marketing course. I'm going to put out more content. But in fact, no matter how much I did that, the business would still be limited by my personal time. And so I think something to think about for a lot of founders and entrepreneurs is, at any given time, there's one thing that's holding back your business. And oftentimes it's the thing that you are not good at and the thing you don't enjoy. And so I loved marketing. I loved writing. And so I was like, well, if I read another book and I take another course, oh, it's okay. I enjoy it. But oftentimes it's the thing you don't enjoy that is holding the business back.
Awesome. I love that. Um, Great. Next question, Jay. Um, Even you've you've had some pretty crazy success in a very short time, right? Because you're still, young, which is very cool. But even with your time on the path, you probably have seen the business kind of path shift a lot. And now with AI and everything that's happening, what is your word of advice or word of warning to someone who's going out today as an entrepreneur, consultant, founder, however you want to bucket that? what do you think they need to hear to be best set up for success?
It's hard to give blanket advice for everyone, but I
Sure.
think the most useful lens that I can give as many people as possible is, what story do you want to tell at the end of this? And so when you are starting out your entrepreneurship journey, it is, I think Elon Musk said, it's like chewing glass and staring out into the abyss. And entrepreneurship is hard. It is incredibly lonely. It is incredibly challenging, and it will not be easy at the start. But I think the question that I always come back to whenever I'm facing anything difficult is, what story do I want to tell at the end of this? Do I want to say that things got hard and Jay quit? Or do I want to say that things got hard, Jay pushed through because he's a winner and he won? And I think that is the most useful lens that I can give anyone starting their entrepreneurship journey.
Man, I love that, dude. I wish I wish I had more of this at my fingertips whenever I was starting, because I had all kinds of baggage and limiting belief, and was trying to find the right people to follow and stuff like that. So, just very cool the amount of progress you've had, right? It's very, very humbling, right? As an older guy myself. If people want to keep up with you on the journey of the next book and, follow you around and everything, where's the best place for them to go?
The best place is my newsletter, janginspires.beehive.com. I send a weekly newsletter, life updates, entrepreneurship updates, book updates, a useful idea every Sunday.
Awesome. Cool. We'll get a link to that in the show notes as well. Jay, thank you so much for coming on and doing this, my friend. Like, I think a lot of people are kind of just stuck waiting for permission that isn't ever going to come, and I hope that this actually gets them into motion and to trying certain things, and so that way they can, get moving as opposed to waiting. So, thank you so much for doing this, man. I really think it's going to help some people.
Thanks for having me on, John.
You're welcome. Cheers.